Welcome to the Healers Podcast, where we inspire and guide healers through business expansion. We give voice to incredibly abundant healers to share their stories. We dive into the quantum field to unlock the energies of conscious creation. We also develop digital tools to help you grow, which you can find on healless.com. I'm your host, Yuli, and I'm grateful you chose to join this space. Now let's go deep. Hello, my dear friends. I'm super thrilled today because I'm going to be sharing with you on this second episode of the Healers Podcast, my own spiritual journey and my own life story. As more and more people these days are going through spontaneous spiritual awakening, I find a tremendous value in sharing those stories and communicating to the world that this is something that is a process that is happening to a lot of people. And maybe it helps some of you to feel less alone or in this experience, maybe less confused and sometimes frightened by all the changes that are going on in your life, in your body, in your brain, because it's not always a pleasant experience. I think a lot of us have this kind of misconception or this idea in the society that a spiritual awakening is this beautiful moment where you sit in the forest or on a mountain and suddenly a divine comes to you and your life changes for the better. And everything from that moment is just this amazing, blissful experience. What I've noticed in reality, actually, this beautiful spiritual awakening, while it is a beautiful moment and it's absolutely incredible if you're able to experience in your lifetime, but it is also in that moment when it's happening, it's actually pretty confusing and it can be very unsettling. Because in that moment, you're not just discovering the divine and discovering some higher powers, you also are shedding your old identity. And with that, you might be shedding everything that comes with that old identity. And that could be big parts of your life. It could be your job, like in my case. It could be your name, even. It could be the life that as you know it. It could be that you decide to completely change your location or your family, your friends circle. I mean, it could come with a lot of changes in your life. And most importantly, the internal changes that suddenly you just do not process reality the same way you're used to. So I wanted to share with you the experience that I've gone through that I find in my case was a little unusual because I don't necessarily divide myself or my life to that kind of moment that there's the life before the awakening and there's that moment and then there's the life after, which does happen to a lot of people. For me, it was mostly about living this kind of parallel life where I always had a spiritual connection and a spiritual side of me. However, my everyday reality forced me to develop a whole other side and live a whole other life as this kind of, business person, tech entrepreneur, creative person, all of those things, all those other things that I was professionally and socially. And for many, many years, actually, my spiritual life, that was pretty rich from the very early days. It was not necessarily shared with my immediate circle. It wasn't part of my identity. If you asked my friends if I was spiritual, people often would say probably no, because it's not something that, one, I chose to talk a lot about with people, and two, I find also in our society, it wasn't as accepted as it is today. And today, more and more people start to share more openly about their spiritual experiences, and it's definitely something more accepted. So many of us don't have to live that kind of dual life, but this was my story. And in the way that I found that having that spiritual connection from the very early days is what got me here, is what got me out of my immediate reality of my childhood, which I'll tell you a little bit about. And this is what allowed me to get to this place, having those guides with me throughout the entire life journey. It was just such a gift. I was born in the 70s in the Soviet Russia. And from the very early days, I remember feeling different, as a different child from everyone else, from not my environment. And even though I was born in a very loving family with really great parents and amazing people, I never felt that the reality outside of my home kind of matches my inner world and people that were around us. I never felt really connected. And in fact, I recently realized that most of my memories from my childhood are black and white, which is kind of surreal. But really, I'm having a hard time to kind of remember outside of very small moments. I don't remember this kind of big, important moments where I felt happy or joyful or kind of just enjoying my childhood. Unfortunately, what I do remember is the strict rules and this whole mentality of just living by a set of rules and following directions and being like everyone else and really trying really hard to fit in. And it was very difficult for me to fit in. And what I developed as a child is a lot of shyness and a lot of nervous energy, to the point that I think my parents and my mother specifically, for the longest time, they really were sure something was wrong with me. And they tried to help as much as they could. And the silver lining of it is that I actually got to know a lot of alternative healers from the very early days because, for example, my mother took me to an acupuncturist when I was just 7, and she took me to a hypnosis session when I was very little. Because they tried to help me as much as I could. They tried to kind of reduce this nervousness around the world outside. And some of it helped, and some of it kind of introduced me to a lot of those alternative methods, which was really incredible. Most of my summer vacations were spent at my grandma's house, who lived in a small town about 4 or 5 hours north of Moscow that was built around a nuclear factory. And you can only imagine if my hometown was pretty depressing and gray, and I only have black and white memories. That town was pretty much kind of the less joyous experience or environment you can imagine for a child. There's not much to do there, and it was really mostly factory workers and their families who worked in this big nuclear factory. One summer, something fascinating happened. There was one theater in that town, and suddenly one day I saw an announcement that there is a Transcendal Meditation workshop happening at that town. And that was probably the most random and mysterious experience of my life, because I have no idea until today how this town even allowed this meditation workshop to happen. And most fascinating fact that it was run by American teachers. And it was probably the first time in my life when I actually met a foreigner, and let alone American. And just to remind you, we're still talking about a time of a Cold War, maybe the early years of warming up of that war, but still pretty intense relationships between the two countries, probably similar to what it is today, unfortunately. But there was no foreigners allowed in those places. And somehow the Transcendental Meditation teachers managed to come, and they chose this small town 4 or 5 hours by train outside of Moscow. And until today, I have no idea why I was chosen, how they got there, and most importantly, how I happened to be there on that day. And this is where my life is kind of full of those mysterious, beautiful spiritual moments, that there is some guiding force that is just putting me in those places and those times that look absolutely out of our ordinary reality. And that was definitely one of those moments. So I think it was a multiple days of workshop where I was taught the basic of meditation. And I was given my mantra, like it is usually given in the Transcendal Meditation studies. But the most fascinating fact for me was those teachers. And it was women. I remember those women wearing those beautiful long floral dresses and just looking so divine and so out of this world. And I just had this image, like those people exist on this planet Earth. There is a different reality and those people are coming from there. So it was kind of like the first seed that was put in my head, in my brain, that there is another life. There's other possibilities that exist outside of this gray box I was living in. And it really set the course for the rest of my life and kind of, pursuing that other reality. But it also connected me with my inner self and introduced me to the practice of meditation, which was a huge tool. And, the interesting part, I did not practice meditation actively throughout my years. I mean, you can imagine then, I was almost in my teen years. You become teenager, you become distracted with many things. Like meditation is not really top of your mind, especially, it's not something that's practiced in your family. I left the country shortly after, and I was dealing with being a new immigrant, and my family moved to Israel. So my meditation practice did not come back until very much later in my life, which I'll talk in a little bit about. But it introduced me to the fact that it existed. It introduced me to the fact that I can go back to that inner space, in that space within myself at any moment, and also introduced me to the fact that there is a higher consciousness. And I was able to touch parts of it and connect with them. And I didn't realize in that moment and throughout my life, but I had always this feeling of connection to my higher self. And I really credit that moment of learning how to meditate in that age of 11 or 12. And it was really a special experience. Later on, as my family managed to escape the Soviet Russia, that was about 1991. And we were able, because my father was Jewish, we were able to escape to Israel. Again, a guiding force that was having this opportunity to start a new life in a free country. It was just incredible. I felt incredibly lucky that I was given another chance to build my life in a place that did not have so many restrictions and boxes. And really, I could focus on living my life and building myself as a human. But unfortunately, when we came to Israel, and things didn't get easier. We had a whole other set of challenges of being new immigrants now in this country. And at that point, if any of you remember history, there was about 1 million of other Russian Jewish immigrants that came to Israel. And this small country of 6 million back then had to accommodate this large influx of immigrants and, supply jobs to everyone and integrate the kids. I was just starting my high school. I was 15 back then. So you can only imagine the stress of a child or a teenager being in this new country, trying to find and to build my new life. And on top of that, we're talking about a very tumultuous time in Israel in the early 90s with the war and the intifada that was going on back then, when people were really, you had terrorists exploding buses in the middle of Tel Aviv, and this very unsettling situation that you just don't have your personal safety. So here I am leaving the communist Russia and all that old regime, finally escaping. and landing in this place that looks like paradise at first. And very quickly, that dream becomes a reality that was not so beautiful, that was filled with a new stress now that is related to personal safety on one hand, and just kind of staying alive and staying also calm in this stressful situation. But also as a teenager who's trying to fit in yet again into this new society, learn a new language, finish high school. The survival mode I was living in all those years just did not stop, unfortunately. But this is when I discovered astrology. And as a child, I was always fascinated by stars and, reading those books about what your astrology sign means and kind of on a very superficial level. But a life introduced me to a pretty famous astrologer in Israel. And she's also a former Russian. Her name is Nellie Friedman. And I somehow at 16 found myself at her astrology school taking a full 2-year course to learn the depth and very details of astrology and become actually someone who could potentially practice. Of course, at that point, I was only 16, 18-year-old. I don't think anyone is looking to go to an 18-year-old astrologer and get a life advice. So I didn't mean to actually practice, but I did use it as a personal tool of transformation. And it was incredible because for the first time, I could look at my chart and I could really understand aspects of my personality. I could really understand who I am and where I'm coming from when I act certain ways, when I think certain ways, and also understand some of my life events and what they mean for me on the global scale. So it was really fascinating just to have that tool in my toolbox, and also something that was very scientific, that connected to astronomy and connected to actual planets that my right brain really appreciated. Another defining moment was for me finding yoga when I was about 23 years old. And at that point, I was actually studying in college, and a friend suggested that I should try yoga because I was looking to do something about my posture and some sort of new way to realign my body. And she suggested yoga. And at that point, I'm talking about, again, mid-90s. Yoga was not a common practice, but yet again, I discovered American teachers that were in the middle of Tel Aviv. There's a school for a younger yoga. And there was 2 American women. I guess the theme kind of followed me from different countries. And again, they looked so different from anyone else that I knew. And they were this amazing, I think there must have been at that point in their, 50s or 60s. And they looked incredible. They looked so much younger, so much healthier than, some of my peers. And they taught a younger yoga. That was the first time that I was actually reconnected with my body. And I learned the tools of, what different movements do to you and how that energy feels. So it was incredible. And then, not to go into details, but on that piece of my life, but at some point I decided that the life in Israel wasn't for me. Between the lack of stability and the constant wars and the tension, both in the society itself, something that we're seeing today blowing up in a big way, and just the idea of not feeling personal safety. At some point, I knew I had to rebuild my reality and create a new one. I wanted to feel safe. I wanted to be free to do whatever it is that I meant to do. Not in a selfish way, but I wanted to follow my personal path. And I find it very difficult to do when you live in countries that are in a constant turmoil or under some sort of a dictatorship that prevents your personal freedom, like in my first case with Russia. And in the second case with Israel, is just because you're preoccupied so much, but what's going on around you and the political situation and the constant kind of, the sense of military emergency. I couldn't live anymore in a constant state of stress and survival. And I really wanted to focus on finding my path, living in peace and a calm environment where I can really figure out what it is I want to do with my life. How can I bring value to the world? How can I build something that I want without those restrictions of my environment? So in 2003, when I was 27 years old, I moved to New York City for my big dream. And it was such a defining moment that literally I had an opportunity to start a third life. And I always joke like I'm like a cat that has 9 lives. I'm living my third, probably the fourth one at this point, because really all of my life parts, they feel like a different life completely, like a different movie, like a different reality with its own set of characters and its own place. So when I moved to New York, I really started to feel like myself. This was the first time I also didn't feel different, or I didn't feel like I didn't fit in. Strangely enough, even though, my English was really terrible and I could barely put 2 words together, I felt like home. I felt like I belong here because everyone else was different. For those of you who've been to New York or are lucky to live here, it's a really unique place on earth when actually being different, coming from a different place or having something different in your background is actually an advantage. This is where people are curious about you. They value it actually more than anything. So I finally found my happy place. And this is where I continued my spiritual journey. And it was so easy because New York is really full of any type of spiritual experience or a teacher you're looking for. You came to the right place. And I continued my journey into yoga. I tried all different types and different yoga modalities. But part of me felt like this wasn't completely real, or I could not really get to the bottom of it. I felt deep inside that I'm only touching the surface. And there's something more about yoga that I need to discover. And this is where I took a trip to India, to Dharamsala, the home of Dalai Lama first, because I was also very curious about Buddhism studies. So I spent some time there. And then finally, I got into Rishikesh, which is the original capital of yoga. And I was like landing in paradise between all the different ashrams and yoga schools. I was kind of overwhelmed. I knew my path will lead me to the right place, and it did happen. It happened actually pretty immediately. This is where I found a Kundalini Yoga, and there was an amazing Kundalini Yoga school in Rishikesh that I'm not sure if it exists anymore, but I had my very first chakra experience. And in Kundalini Yoga, for those of you who practiced, and in that particular school, they were known about this very slow-paced yoga where you're actually holding the poses sometimes for 30 minutes to an hour. So it's just kind of like this long, extended meditation that is happening within a yoga pose. And that was physically challenging and mentally challenging. But this is what, for the first time, I remember this moment like it happened yesterday. I was in the middle of just kind of on my probably 30th minute of holding this pose. And I could feel my first chakra opening. Like it's nothing I can possibly put into words, but I felt energy flowing. I felt opening and expansion. I did not know, I wasn't looking for it. I did not know what it was before, but in the moment it happened, I knew what I was experiencing. And from that on, I continued to practice Kundalini Yoga. When I came back to New York, I found amazing school, Kundalini Yoga East, with an incredible teacher, Sachivan Singh, which was the direct student of Yogi Bhajan, who brought Kundalini Yoga to the States. And I studied with some amazing other teachers like Aman Beer and the Golden Bridge Studio in the city. It was really, I found my home in terms of the yoga style, because it wasn't just this power yoga when you just kind of do it for the sake of the exercise or stretching. And of course, all of those are benefits of yoga. But it was for the first time I was working with energies. And again, I did not realize that at that point that that's what's happening. But that what Kundalini Yoga did for me, and awakened the energies inside my body. And it started guiding me. I started having those experiences within the yoga classes. I started seeing messages. I started getting downloads while I'm practicing yoga or doing their meditation. And this is actually where I got back to finally meditate, is during the Kundalini Yoga classes, because meditation is a big piece of that. Another defining spiritual moment didn't come until 2019. And this is when I went to the Goop Wellness Summit in New York City. And it was really an incredible event that I was drawn to instantly. But I didn't realize until I got there that this was my spiritual community. Those people existed. And they existed in this kind of really interesting conference setting that I never thought was possible. I never thought it was possible to have this kind of spiritual business, period. And on that scale, it was 1,000 people on that weekend attending different workshops, and anything from intuitive reading to psychic reading to yoga and aura reading, you name it. It was so out there, but in such an open and normal way that this was the moment for me to reconnecting with that piece of me. Because for a while I was so busy with building my business and running a startup and being this CEO of a tech company and breaking into fashion industry and having this amazing clients and, making all this abundance that that side of me was kind of sleeping. And when I came to Goop and I saw those 1,000 people and I saw all those amazing, incredible teachers, I realized how much I missed that. And I realized that there's a whole world that I need to reconnect with. And this was also the place where I met another important person for me. And I took her workshop very randomly, but I was drawn to her. I knew coming to that day, to this Goop Summit, that I wanted to take a workshop with Laura Day. And I don't know why. I mean, obviously she's an incredibly and very well-known intuitive reader, but I just had to take that workshop. And of course it was already sold out. It was full, but I patiently waited and waited until someone maybe won't show up. And that was, of course I got in. And this was a workshop where literally in just under an hour, this incredible woman, Laura Day, she taught us how to become intuitive reader and how to read for other people and for yourself. And it was never something that even occurred to me. I never thought that I had any sort of intuitive abilities. I knew I had a strong intuition, but I never really recognized that. And in that workshop, it was a very intimate, small group. And Laura really pushes your limits. And she also puts us on the spot. And at some point, she asks, okay, who wants to practice? And who wants to, let's practice on each other and see how we do. And she throws you right in. And the first practice was to read for Laura Day. And I don't know how, but my hand just went up in the air. And I found myself doing an intuitive reading for Laura Day. And it was just an incredible moment. And I remember just kind of in that moment of pressure, just connecting with my inner self and sharing pretty, I would say confidently, some insights. And later on, she told me that it was incredible and it was something that she was wondering for a while. And I kind of helped her to unlock that piece of information. It was extremely empowering experience because I was reminded of my own intuitive abilities, but I also realized that I can actually read for other people. It's not like I ever had, was going to have a career as an intuitive reader, but it was just empowering to know that I can do it. I can do it even for friends and family, which I do it often, and I enjoy this process a lot. But I find it an incredible skill to have. And recently, last year, I had a chance to revisit Laura Day's workshop, a full week workshop, actually at Omega Institute here in New York. So I was very lucky to work with her again and just hear, be around her and hear her brilliance. She is someone very important in my life. Again, someone who helped me rediscover those intuitive abilities. And as I continued to develop those abilities, I also took a psychic course with another incredible teacher, Tori Quisling, who I really love. And she really teaches in a very approachable way and a very positive and often even humorous way how to read for people. She has an incredible community around her, people that do readings as well. So it was great to kind of get her style of readings as well, because it's a little more structured and defined. And I love that. But really, the next defining moment in my life was that came shortly after that Goop Summit. Later in 2019, I had my real spiritual awakening. And like I said earlier in this podcast, in that moment, I did not realize what it was. Only later on, I realized, I knew I had an incredible spiritual, mystical experience, but I did not expect it to change my life so deeply. And that moment came when I signed up for a weekend retreat here at Garrison Institute. And it's an incredible place that is literally just minutes away from my house. And back then, we just got the house in this area. We weren't even living here full time. And it was just absolutely random booking for me, just being curious about that place and seeing who is teaching there this weekend. And it happened to be that an incredible teacher and now my very personal spiritual guru, I would say, Dr. Irene Siegel. She was teaching a shamanic workshop that weekend. And without knowing Irene or any of the students or anything at all about her teachings, I signed up. And that weekend, 3 days working with Irene and staying there for the guided meditations really completely rewired my brain, reconnected me with meditation practice, allowed me to discover worlds that I've never been to, connect with my higher self, and connect with my guides that finally I was able to meet and see and be introduced to. And it put me on a different path. It put me on a different path in life, period, with everything I was doing. Literally, I came back that Monday morning and I changed everything about what I was doing, what I was working on. And I set myself on a new path. I was shedding my old self. I was making radical changes in what I was doing, where I was going with my professional, personal future. But the most difficult part about it is I didn't really know where I was going. I was trusting my intuition. I was trusting my guides. But at that moment, I had no idea what the reason is for changes, where am I going to end up, where are they leading. So in that process, I just decided to continue to explore, and I had taken other courses with Irene. I took something that's called Awakening Your Light Body course, which is taught by Oren and Dabin, or channeled, and you can find more details about that. It's one of those courses that was really unique, and it's this hidden treasure, what I call, that teaches you everything you need to know about your energetic body and how to operate it and how to, communicate with that, how to transmit information, how to do healings. So it's not necessarily a healing technique on its own. It's really a tool of personal transformation. And Awakening Your Light Body course, it took 6 months, and we did an amazing group with amazing human beings. But it really, for the first time, I started to, not just like in Kundalini Yoga, I could feel the energies, but I couldn't really control them or direct them. I didn't really know how to work with them. With Awakening Your Light Body, I finally had the tools that I needed to really understand how to work with energies. And then I took other courses and meditations from Oren and Dabin that kind of dive even deeper into, from working with energies, how to create energies, how to create this kind of, they call it self-excitement, or, this vortex that really propels you forward. And it's really fascinating studies that usually you find them as a word of mouth. So hopefully you're gonna, they don't do any marketing, which is fascinating to me. Their company is called Luminescence. So if you're curious about it, go check it out. There's some amazing courses there that are absolutely underrated, in my opinion, because they teach you some amazing basics of working with energies. Then when the pandemic started, Irene also brought online a group that she's been teaching for many, many years, since actually the late 80s, that's called the Incan Medicine Wheel. And it's basically a weekly meditation group where we meditate as a group, and it's guided meditations by Dr. Irene Siegel, who's, again, this incredible shamanic practitioner who also happens to be a PhD in psychotherapy. So she's one of those unique human beings that walks between the worlds. And what she brings is this amazing journeys into past, future, present, and the things that you discover during those journeys and the worlds that you visit are absolutely incredible. And she's a very skilled guide that, I happen to get to know closely since then, because she's been a big part of my life and my transformation. And I actually hope to have her as one of our very early guests on this podcast and have a fascinating conversation with her. But she was a big part of my spiritual awakening in that moment, that retreat in the Garrison Institute, that weekend-long retreat. I will never forget that moment, because I came out of it not the same person. And even though I had this spiritual side in me my entire life, and I got to know my guide slowly, and I knew how to work with energies a little bit, it was never kind of like in that full force that it came out during that weekend. And to finish, my most recent spiritual journey is the discovery of the incredible Dr. Joe Dispenza. And this has been the last year and a half of my life. And again, another defining moment. And like many of people who came to study with Dr. Joe, I was pushed to it by a friend who kept insisting that I look into the work, and, it's something very special that I have to check out, and I have to attend one of the retreats. And I started slowly. I got curious. I read the book called Becoming Supernatural, which was incredible. I downloaded Dr. Joe's meditations. I started meditating. I loved his walking meditations because during the pandemic, I was doing a lot of hiking, and I live in an incredible area with some beautiful mountains. So those walking meditations were really a great way to connect with nature, but also go within. And then finally, when his Cancun retreat was announced last December, it was December 2022, I just knew I had to be there. I had a strong urge at that moment. At that point, my respect and admiration for Dr. Joe was pretty strong. And I just knew that I had to have this experience myself. And surely enough, that 1 week in December, and it was just 6 months ago, again, changed my life completely. It didn't put me necessarily on a new path in terms of what I was doing because I was already developing my business, my Healist, that is a business for healers. I was already in the path. I knew what my mission was and what I came here to do. But personally, I think, and like many of Dr. Joe's students are saying, this is something that opens your heart in a way that you never imagined. It connects the heart and the brain in a way that is extremely coherent. And it's something, again, a term that Dr. Joe uses a lot, creating that coherence between the heart and the brain. It's something very unique to his teachings. And that week was just an incredible opportunity to go within. I never in my life meditated for 6 hours a day, so it was pretty intense experience and self-discovery. And what I found fascinating is that the fact that he couples it with a lot of incredible lectures in neuroscience and physics, and just bringing the quantum into the teachings and really explaining how things work on an energetic level as well. And he explains it in the most practical way. So I found that again, my right brain connected really well with that. But the most, I would say, surprising and the most incredible piece of that retreat was the group healings. And those of you who attended Dr. Joe's retreats know what I'm talking about because it's something very unique to him. That is actually out of the 2,000 people that come to those retreats, by the way, just to give you a scale of the energy of the group, usually about 100 people come as healies. And what they do is they receive those group healings from the rest of us. And again, for the first time, I was in a position that I was actually healing another person. And to me, that was definitely the highlight. And this is where I felt just like I felt with that first chakra opening back in Rishikesh in the early 2000s, I had another moment like that, but experiencing it with my heart. I could feel my heart cracking open and during the very first group healing sessions when a man that I never met and I didn't know who he was laying on the floor and receiving this group healing from a few of us. And I never felt such connection to a stranger and a connection when I experienced this unconditional love and healing that I was sending his way. And in that moment, it was, sorry, I'm joking. I'm just talking about it because in that moment, it wasn't about me. It was about somebody else. And it was about helping somebody else. And that was just extremely profound experience for me, just to understand that, yes, we work with energies and we work with spirituality. And a lot of it is for our own personal journey and transformation, which is extremely important. But to be able to use all those skills to heal someone else, that's an extreme power. And that's like such a rewarding experience that really opened a whole other dimension for me. And this is where I got to understand healers so deeply that, there's people out there and many of you that choose to do that on a daily basis as their profession. And it's just like an incredible path. I couldn't imagine having this feeling every day to be able to heal people and help other people. how rewarding could that be? And, since then I'm participating in group healings and trying to give my energy to as many people as possible. But my path just solidified in that moment that I'm here to help the healers. I'm here to encourage more people to become healers and get on that path, because we need more. So many of us need healing these days. But I'm also here to make this 3D reality for healers much easier. And having that experience myself completely solidified my path with Healist. So thank you for coming along on this very short version of my lifelong spiritual journey. And I know it continues every day. I've been, since coming back from Dr. Joe retreats, I'm meditating at least an hour a day. I can't imagine my life without it. And it just became part of my reality. And I can't wait to continue sharing those bits and pieces and those very personal experiences with you, because I do believe it's important. It's important to share those experiences, no matter how intimate or personal they are, because this is how we inspire others to get on this path and rediscover, transform, and heal themselves.